absolutely there to support our students when they have treatment needs and to get that word out about being healthy and staying healthy in order to maximize your success now as a student, but as post-high school as well. So kudos to everyone involved to support this work. Clark?
Thank you, Becky. Becky and I, as you know, are former directors for assessment, and we looked at all these percentages, and we watched them all decline, and we were a little worried for a moment until we remembered we were not looking at performance statements. Yeah, it's the right kind of decline. So Becky told you about the percentage of students who've tried substances. Two more parts of our report tonight. One is about students' experiences with negative consequences of alcohol. We know alcohol by far is the substance that students are most likely to abuse with the negative consequences in high school and in other grade levels as well. So what this is, so the next piece here will be about negative consequences. A couple of points here to make is that the percentage of students in grades 8, 10, and 12 reporting negative consequences decreased or remained stable. And in 6th grade, we saw an increase of 1 percentage point of 2 of those negative consequences, that is, feeling sick or reporting feeling sorry for something that they had done. And as Becky did with the results of before, if we consider 5 negative consequences, and we'll just read those really quickly so all can hear those. 1 consequence, you felt really sick because of drinking, you got into a physical fight because of drinking, you got into trouble at school because of drinking, you got into trouble at home because of drinking, or you did something you later felt sorry for because of drinking. Those are the 5 negative consequences that we reported on. And there were 4 grade levels, so that's 20 grade level consequence combinations. And what we saw is that for 18 of those, we saw a decrease or stable, and we saw increases in those 2 that I pointed out. So once again, that we're following a trend here that we're seeing students reporting fewer negative consequences. So if we could look at the 8th grade, and so kind of gone through the highlights on these, but what you can see across the board is either a decrease or stable and at pretty low levels there. If we take a look at 10th grade, and as Becky pointed out with ever tried substances, we noticed that at each grade level that we go up, we have more reports of negative consequences. So that's true here with 10th grade compared to our middle schoolers. And we saw a pretty large decrease in the number of students who reported the consequence of feeling sick. That was a 6-point decline that we saw for that consequence. And the other larger consequence reported was felt sorry for something they did, and that was a 2-point decline for the 10th graders. We could look at 12th grade then, and once again we see the trend where larger proportion of students reporting some negative consequence. For the 12th graders, we saw the same percentage, 14, 15 for we felt sick, and a slight decrease for felt sorry later. So the third portion of our report tonight has to do with students' beliefs about the effects of alcohol and marijuana. And this one, I'm going to talk you through this a little bit because we're looking at 2 different kinds of beliefs. One is a belief about the negative aspects of a substance, and another type is the perceived or potential positive effects of a substance. And so if you think about, we would like one to be high, that is beliefs in negative effects, and one to be lower, that is beliefs about positive effects. So what you're going to see on these graphs coming up is you're going to see some of the bars pretty long and some of the bars pretty short. So, and what we found here was the percentage of students' belief about the negative effects of alcohol and marijuana showed a decline for grades 6 and 8. Small declines, but they were there, and we'll see those as we look at those grade levels individually. On the other hand, we saw percentages of students indicating negative beliefs about the effects of marijuana showed increases in grades 10 and 12. And so an increase here is really a positive. That is, our 10th and 12th graders are more inclined this year versus 2 years ago to see some of the negative impacts of marijuana. We were very interested to see how the change in laws about marijuana might affect some of our survey results. And so we've been watching these very carefully. Beliefs about the negative effects of alcohol show general stability in grades 10 through 12. So let's take a look at a couple of these graphs. If you turn to 6th grade, and you'll notice that the bars that are short there are relatively stable across time, and those are the students' beliefs about potential positive impacts, such as alcohol relaxes you, alcohol lets you have more fun, alcohol helps you get away from your problems. So those would be those kinds of perceptions. On the other hand, the negative perceptions, that is, alcohol makes you do poorly in sports, gets you in trouble at school, slows down your reaction time. What we saw in those cases also was generally stability, but slight declines in those. If we take a look at marijuana, you'll notice similar kinds of trends. The questions are similar, slightly different though. Marijuana, for the potentially positive perceptions, marijuana relaxes you, lets you have more fun, helps you get away from your problems. Those just like alcohol. And very similar kinds of results there. And then the others, marijuana makes it hard to remember things, makes you do poorly in school, makes you do things you might regret. Somewhat akin to what we saw with alcohol. And what we see there for 6th grade is we see relative stability, but a slight decrease in the beliefs about negative effects. You see that same trend continuing with 8th grade. We do notice, though, in 8th grade that the short bars get a little longer. That is, that there's a larger proportion of students who have a perception of some potentially positive benefits for alcohol, relaxing you, lets you have more fun, slows down your reaction time. We also, when we look at the beliefs about their negative effects, we see that those are still fairly stable over time, but once again, a slight decrease in a couple of those measures. Very similar kind of results with 8th grade for marijuana. We notice that very stable in those results. Slight declines in the negative consequences, beliefs that marijuana makes it hard to remember things, marijuana makes you do poorly in school, makes you do things that you might regret. So as we move along to 10th grade, and once again you'll notice the short bars get a little longer, long bars get a little shorter. And so we've got, when we look at 10th graders and their beliefs about alcohol, what we notice here is 10th graders were less likely to report positive effects this year compared to 2 years ago. So that's I think a positive trend. And another positive trend is that they were more likely to report the negative trend of doing poorly in sports. But we did see a decline on getting in trouble at school, slowing down reaction time. Marijuana, this was one, especially with the high schoolers, we were interested in what are their beliefs relative to some of the legislation that we've seen in a lot of the reporting around that. And so what we saw is, once again, fairly stable results. We did see in each of the cases around the understanding or the beliefs about negative consequence, a slight increase in the number of students who saw those as negative consequence for marijuana, which is kind of an interesting because it contrasted just a little bit with alcohol. And one of the theories would have been that as it was legalized, it would go the other way. So interesting, and I think that's perhaps, as Becky was alluding to, work on the part of our schools to really get that message out. In 12th grade, we see really for the potential positive effects, we either see stable or a decrease in the students believing in that. And then for the negative effects of alcohol, really remarkable stability. anything, just a slight increase in their beliefs about the negative consequences for alcohol. Marijuana, very much like the 10th grade story. We saw increases in students, and these are not large, but they're still consistent increases in the students' beliefs about and understanding of the negative impacts of marijuana. So those are the reports from the Project Alert survey.
Questions? Ms. Johnson.
Well, thank you both for analyzing all that information. And I was curious, what can you highlight, if possible, in the alert curriculum that that led it to be implemented, and what are the chief aspects that differ from the earlier one?
One of the biggest driving forces in terms of, and I'll defer to Dr. Field if I leave anything out, but to really look at various curricula that were research-based and that had approval, if you will, of an organization such as SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. They endorsed this program of Project Alert, and it is research-based, and that was very important to the team that looked at it. Dr. Field, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and we were also very focused on middle school kids. That's where you have to intervene or educate 12, 13-year-olds. And we looked at a lot of programs, and we found that that one was the most age appropriate for 12 to 13-year-olds. High school curriculum were a little bit more intense, and we found that it taught what we needed it to teach. It also has what we call, it's not just a Just Say No program, it has motivators, so it looks at just the whole idea around alcohol and substance abuse, you know, what motivates people to use. So it's one of the best out there.
One of the components too, and I can speak to this just because of my work at Discovery Canyon Middle School, one aspect that I very much appreciated about it was there were 11 different lessons. You can combine them, but 11 different lessons at 7th grade. As Dr. Field said, middle school is so important. But then at 8th grade, there are specific lessons, 3 of them called booster lessons. So students aren't repeating the exact curriculum that they've seen in 7th grade. They're revisiting it from a different perspective, a different angle, a different grade level. Now they've matured from that 7th to 8th grade level. So that's a component that I always appreciated as well at the building level.
Are those lessons delivered in health class, or principally that when they do?
Sure. It depends at the middle level. For example, some of the curriculum is delivered in the intervention time, like Eagle time at Eagle View, Cheetah time at Challenger. At Discovery Canyon campus, some of the work is done during the PE classes, and a variety of individuals teach it. It sometimes might be the classroom teacher, it sometimes is the counselor, sometimes the SRO and security officer are a part of that instructional delivery. So it really is different based upon the school, but that's just some examples of how that curriculum is delivered.
Well, so with the focus or with the emphasis or chief attribute being the middle school, why do you think there was the 30% basically participation response rate, or the response rate at middle school was 30%-ish and high school was 50%-ish?
It could have just been how the schools approached it and selecting the sample size of the students who participated. You know, schools know that they are looking for at least 25% so that we feel like we're having enough of a healthy sample size, a randomized sample. So perhaps just the approaches at the high school invited, you know, more students during the day. It's typically during the day that it happens, so simply involve more students in actually participating in the particular survey.
Yeah. All right.
Well, you know I have to comment about this. I really want to applaud your work, and you know, 2 of the things that I participated in that were very close to me personally was Project Alert and our crisis response team. And What's really gratifying is to see 5 years down the road that we're not only still doing that, we're doing it well. And so I just want to, again, say thank you. A lot of times, you know, when you leave a job, you think, well, you know, what's going to happen? And this clearly was an effort that was undertaken well and consistently. Very appreciative.
Mrs. Boyd.
This is one report where I too am quite grateful to see the numbers go down, and hope that that continues. I was curious about those last reports where you were talking about the negative and positive perceptions. And I guess in my mind, I thought that if a negative perception went down, then a positive perception went up. But it seemed that they either all went down or they all went up. You know what I'm talking about? And so explain that to me, because I know you've sort of delved into this.
So we did see it a little different at different grade levels. But I'll just take a look. Let's just, if we look at the last slide, is so the effects of marijuana. So the we would say that a student might have what they would see as a potential positive perception about marijuana. That is that they would use a positive light for relaxes you, lets you have fun, helps you get away from your problems. So students those might be motivators to take it, to take marijuana. What we saw there is here we saw kind of a mixed bag. So we saw that marijuana relaxes you. We saw a decline in the number of students who believe that as a potential motivator. Lets you have more fun. We did see a slight increase in that. Helps you get away from your problems. We saw that one as not changing. So those would be, when I mean positive, I mean they would see it as a potential positive. Perhaps that might be a motivator to take it. The belief the beliefs about the negatives would be things that would be resistors, and so that probably would have been a better way for me to term those. But we saw for the 12th graders, for example, we saw that those resistors, or those understanding or the beliefs about the negative effects, were increased between 14 and 16 for each of those cases. So that means that those beliefs about the things that would resist them or keep them from perhaps trying or using marijuana got stronger between 14 and 16.
Right, so can you explain why? Like, you know, if I'm looking at this going, they say marijuana makes it hard to remember things, and that increased. But then they also say marijuana lets you have more fun. So it's like both the negative and the positive are increasing, and that seemed to be the case on most of these charts. So that's what I was confused about, because I guess I expected that one would increase and the other would decrease. And so, did you have any theory? No?
I don't have a good theory, but I think though that each of those questions, I think they all have a lot of context for students, and I wonder about things like the education that we get might be more like that they hear that we would try to teach them about would probably be more effective at strengthening those resistors, but they probably get a lot of their perceptions from peers about things that would be potential contributors, or so I think some of the information may be coming from different sources.
So they know one to be true, but they believe the other to be true. But
Well,
they're conflicted.
I know, Catherine, I look at it a little differently, and it's from an educational standpoint, because as maybe one of the few people in the world that's never ever tried marijuana, period, this is about his beliefs. From what I know and understand, marijuana relaxes you. Yes. Marijuana makes it hard to remember things. Yes. Marijuana lets you have more fun. Yes. Marijuana makes you do poorly in school. Yes. So if you took a belief and interviewed all 5 of us, or all 6 of us all sitting, it would probably be 100% based on what our beliefs are. That doesn't mean that you do it. But that's, from an educational standpoint, if you make people understand it, then maybe they say, well, Jesus, made me do poorly in school. probably shouldn't do it. Even if it's gonna make me have fun, the repercussions, as they talked about, repercussions of that later makes me not wanna do it. So I see it as beliefs.
I agree, and I would add on to that, we see that as marijuana relaxes you, as perhaps that's a positive. I'm not sure teenagers think being relaxed is positive. It's not. I mean, they might see that as a negative, that might actually be a good thing.
as well. Well, something kind of jumped off the page at me. If you look at the first slide on page 7, just pull that up there. And this is 12th grade trends. Okay? Correct me if I'm misreading this, but if you were a 12th grader who took this survey last year in 16, you were part of a cohort who got this treatment for the full treatment. And if you look at the trends, just take 12 to 16, and you look at the trends on those substance abuse areas, they are almost all consistently going down. And that, for me, is the real story. That's what we're trying to do. I don't really care what their perception of what it does is, except insofar as it gives them skills to resist that. And that is a very striking result.
Yeah.
Very striking. I wouldn't go so far to say, with my limited training in statistics, that it is statistically significant, but it's significant to me.
Colonel Hart.
I too was very interested in this and found it very informative. Is the Project Alert data gathered nationally or in other states other than Colorado? That would be an interesting means of comparison.
Yeah, there are other, Project Alert, the RAND Corporation runs that particular effort as the nonprofit research organization, and they do have some data. For example, some of the data that they publish is that what they have seen, and here's how they describe it, a field test over a 10-year period, so throughout the nation. So some examples that they have shared, a 40% drop in students experimenting with cigarettes and becoming regular smokers. So some of the questions, there are 94 questions in this survey. We've just given you some highlights. So some of the questions are more complex and will draw out, if you started, do you discontinue? For example, 24% lower alcohol score, a 20% reduction of highest risk early drinkers, 20 to 25% decrease in cigarette use during the past month, etc. So the RAND Corporation does do a nice job of putting on their website some of the national data and trends that they are seeing. And what I appreciate about RAND as well is things have changed. We look at things like cigarettes. Well, now there are e-cigarettes. And look at just the changes in marijuana over the legalization. And so they are starting to put out some updates regarding some of this curriculum so that now we can share it with our middle schools in 3 specific areas, e-cigarettes, heroin, and marijuana. They've made those items more current and to reflect current practice, so we'll be sharing them with schools so they can infuse that information in their curriculum. But I think it's a really nice partnership with RAND because of their research work to be able to partner with this work with Project Alert. I think they complement each other nicely.
The reason I ask, I was interested in the change in legislation, this is how that would work. But since we don't have a control group, at least in this data, I would be interested in seeing whether the trends for marijuana use or perceptions about it are the same nationally, or is there a difference between where it's been utilized and where it hasn't?
Sure, and that would be interesting, and that's certainly something that we can look at.
And Colonel, I was thinking, as you were talking about that, if you have data for the last handful of years and you take the places that it is legalized on a recreational basis, and then look at it over the past handful of years, and then you have a few more that are, I think, on the ballot this year, 4 or 5 states that are putting on. Is it possible that in states that recreationally it has become legal because there's such a heightened awareness of that maybe parents pay more attention because it's more readily available, therefore education and maybe a little bit of enforcement on the parent side has actually driven that down? I'm just thinking of an OR project for...
Yeah, I was thinking along similar lines.
Because I think Mr. Borland hit it, you kind of have a cohort here over the past handful of years with a project here. Take that and apply that at a few other states. If there's the project data that is available, those states that have legalized on a recreational basis, or maybe even go back into the medicinal, because I think there's 23 states that do that. That might be an interesting thing, that public awareness of availability might actually, which creates maybe parental enforcement, because they think it's so easy, and parental awareness that actually might drive it down in those states.
Yes, and other states are looking at Colorado, they're
Yeah.
like this,
Lead the
saying,
state.
well, is
Yeah.
legalization a decent idea for our state, or is this gonna lead to undesirable trends among kids?
Other questions? Thank you. Between 7 and 7:30, let's take a very quick biological break.